They yanked her onto the pavement, laughing as she curled around her stomach until the street went dead silent. The phones kept recording, but the men pulling her back suddenly froze because the footsteps behind them weren't running. And when the voice finally spoke, they realized the pregnant woman they'd dragged outside didn't belong to the street. The street belonged to her husband. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. The neon signs buzzed against the thick night air, their electric hum barely audible over the muffled bass thumping from inside the bar. Red light from the bar sign bled across the wet pavement, mixing with the blue glow of open and the green shimmer of the Shamrock 2 doors down. The street smelled like rain and cigarettes and something darker, desperation, maybe, or the kind of fear that settles into concrete after years of bad decisions. Benedetta Leone sat at the corner booth inside, her black dress stretched tight across her swollen belly, the gray leather jacket draped over her shoulders offering little warmth against the bar's aggressive air conditioning. She shouldn't have been there. She knew that. Claudio had told her to stay home, to rest, to let his men handle the meeting with the bar owner who'd been skimming protection money for 3 months. But Benedetta didn't like being told what she couldn't do, especially not when she was perfectly capable of having a conversation. The bar owner, a sweating man named Richie with thinning hair and shaking hands, had taken one look at her condition and started crying. Literally crying. He'd promised to have the money by morning, had sworn on his mother's grave, had begged her not to tell Mr. Leone about the shortage. She'd simply nodded, finished her sparkling water, and stood to leave. That's when she'd noticed them. 2 men by the door, hooded sweatshirts despite the humidity, chains glinting at their necks. One tall and lean with a silver watch that caught the light every time he moved. The other broader, more aggressive in his posture, with ripped jeans and an expression that said he'd been waiting all night for something to go wrong. They watched her stand, watched her adjust her jacket, watched her walk toward the exit with the careful balance of a woman 7 months pregnant navigating a floor sticky with spilled beer. She felt their eyes on her belly first, then her face, then her handbag, expensive leather, hand-stitched, the kind that screamed money in a place where most people paid in crumpled bills. The taller one, Dominic, moved first. He stepped directly into her path, his hood shadowing his face, his chain swinging slightly as he positioned himself between her and the door. "Where are you going?" His voice carried that particular blend of boredom and malice that Benedetta had heard 1,000 times before. Small men playing at power. "Home," she replied evenly, her accent carrying just the slightest Italian lilt that she'd never quite lost, despite 20 years in America. "Through our bar?" The second man, Adam, circled around to her left, cutting off her angle to the side exit. "I wasn't aware the bar belonged to you." Benedetta's voice remained calm, almost conversational. She'd been taught by Claudio's father, years ago, that the moment you raise your voice, you've already lost control of the room. Dominic laughed a harsh, ugly sound. "Everything on this block belongs to us, princess. Especially dressed like that, belly out, walking around like you own the place." She could feel the other patrons watching now, phones coming out slowly, discreetly, the bartender pretending to wipe glasses while his eyes darted toward the confrontation. Richie had disappeared entirely, probably out the back door the second trouble started brewing. "I don't want any problems," Benedetta said quietly. "I'm just leaving." "Too late for that." Dominic's hand shot out and grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "This is our territory. You don't walk through here without paying respect." Adam moved in from the other side, his fingers digging into her other arm. "Uptown trash, thinking she can slum it down here. Let's teach her some manners." They pulled. Benedetta's heel slipped on the beer-slick floor. Her body tilted backward, momentum carrying her toward the exit as both men hauled her toward the door. She didn't fight, not yet. Fighting would escalate things, would put the baby at risk, would force her to reveal exactly who she was before she was ready. Instead, she memorized. Dominic, approximately 6'2", maybe 180 pounds, silver chain with a cross pendant, small scar above his left eyebrow, scent of cheap cologne and marijuana. Adam, 5'11", 200 pounds, silver watch on right wrist, left-handed, ripped jeans with a specific tear pattern on the left knee, breathing heavy from exertion, despite her light weight. The door burst open. Night air hit her face. Rain-slicked pavement rushed up to meet her. She went down hard, catching herself with her right palm, while her left arm wrapped protectively around her stomach. Pain shot through her wrist. Her handbag hit the concrete beside her, contents spilling: lipstick, compact mirror, phone, the small leather wallet Claudio had given her on their anniversary. "Get your pregnant ass off our street," Dominic spat, standing over her, chest heaving with excitement and adrenaline. The crowd from inside had followed them out. More phones, more witnesses. A woman in the background gasped. Someone muttered about calling the police, but nobody moved. Nobody ever moved. Benedetta sat on the cold, wet pavement, her dress riding up slightly, her jacket askew, her hair falling across her face. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. She simply looked up at them, her blue eyes clear and sharp and memorizing every detail, every word, every second of this humiliation. And then she heard it. Footsteps. Not running, not frantic, just steady, deliberate footsteps approaching from somewhere behind Dominic and Adam. The kind of footsteps that don't hurry because they don't need to. The crowd shifted. Someone backed up. A woman grabbed her friend's arm and pulled her toward the opposite side of the street. Benedetta's lips curved into the smallest, coldest smile. Adam noticed first. "Dom," he whispered, his voice suddenly tight. "Dom, someone's..." But Dominic was still riding his high, still feeling invincible, still convinced he'd just established dominance over some random pregnant woman who'd wandered onto his corner. He didn't turn around. Not until the footsteps stopped. Not until the entire street went silent except for the buzzing neon and the distant sound of traffic. Not until a voice, low, controlled, and absolutely devoid of emotion, spoke from directly behind him. "Gentlemen, I believe you're standing on my wife." Dominic Kovalenko had been running these streets since he was 16 years old. 9 years of grinding, hustling, proving himself in a city that chewed up weak men and spit them out in pieces. He wasn't weak. He'd made damn sure of that. He'd started as a lookout for corner dealers, graduated to collections, then enforcement. By 23, he and Adam had carved out their own little kingdom, 4 blocks of bars, liquor stores, and late-night businesses that paid them for protection. It wasn't much compared to the real players, the ones with entire neighborhoods under their control, but it was theirs, and on these 4 blocks, Dominic's word was law. "She's probably from that new condo development," Adam muttered beside him, watching Benedetta struggle to gather her scattered belongings from the wet pavement. "You know, those luxury places going up on Riverside? They're always wandering down here thinking it's authentic or some shit." Dominic nodded, his eyes tracking the woman's movements with predatory focus. "Look at that jacket. That's what, 1,500? 2 grand? And the handbag, real leather, not that synthetic crap. Designer shoes too," Adam added, cracking his knuckles habitually. "Even pregnant. She's dressed like she's going to some charity gala. What the hell is she doing in Richie's dive?" That was the thing that bothered Dominic most, not the assault itself, but the question mark. Women like this didn't just wander into their territory. They Ubered to the trendy gastropubs 3 blocks north, the ones with valet parking and cocktails that cost $20. They didn't sit alone in bars where the bathrooms hadn't been properly cleaned since 2019, but she had been alone. He'd watched her for 20 minutes before making his move, watched her sit calmly at that corner booth, watched old Richie practically prostrate himself in front of her like she was royalty. That had irritated him too, the way Richie, who owed them $300 in protection money, had ignored Dominic's text messages all night but had sat attentively with this stranger. "Maybe she's a social worker," Adam suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Or a lawyer. Could be checking on Richie for some legal thing." "Don't care what she is," Dominic replied, feeling that familiar rush of power that came from enforcing boundaries. "She pays the toll, or she learns not to come back." Adam shifted his weight, and Dominic caught something in his partner's expression: hesitation, maybe, or second thoughts. Adam had always been the cautious one, the one who calculated risks while Dominic acted on instinct. "You sure about this, man?" Adam's voice dropped lower. "Pregnant woman, all these cameras. That's exactly why we do it." Dominic cut him off sharply. "Cameras mean nothing if nobody knows who we are. Hoods up, heads down. And pregnant or not, she needs to learn the rules. Everyone needs to learn the rules." That was Dominic's philosophy, the code that had kept him alive and in control. Respect wasn't given, it was taken. The moment you let someone slide, the moment you showed weakness because of circumstances or sympathy, you were finished. Other people would smell that weakness like blood in water. His father had taught him that before disappearing when Dominic was 12. His mother had reinforced it through her bitterness and her boyfriends and her addiction. The streets had carved it into his bones during his first stint in juvie at 17. Power was everything. And power required demonstration. Look at her, Dominic said, gesturing dismissively at Benedetta as she sat motionless on the pavement, her hand still protecting her swollen stomach. She's not even fighting, not even crying. That's what's weird. Adam insisted, his eyes narrowing. Most people, you throw them on the ground, they're screaming or begging or at least trying to get up. She's just sitting there. Dominic had noticed it too, though he'd interpreted it differently. He saw submission, where Adam saw something else. To him, her silence meant acceptance that she understood the hierarchy now, understood that she'd crossed into territory she didn't belong in. She's scared, Dominic declared confidently, just too proud to show it. Rich people are like that. They think if they act calm and dignified, we'll just back off. Maybe we should, Adam said quietly. Dominic's head whipped toward his partner. What? I'm just saying, we made our point. She's on the ground, everyone saw it. She knows not to come back. Why push it further? Because that's not how it works, Dominic wanted to scream. You don't make a point and then walk away. You make a point and then you stand on it until everyone watching understands that you meant every second of it. You getting soft on me? Dominic's voice carried an edge of threat. Because if you can't handle this basic shit anymore, I can handle it. Adam snapped back, though his eyes kept darting toward the woman, toward the crowd, toward the phones recording everything. I'm just saying something feels off. Look at her face, Dom. Really look at it. Dominic looked. The woman, Benedetta, though he didn't know her name yet, was staring up at them with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not fear, not anger. Something colder, something patient, like she was waiting. The thought unsettled him for half a second before he crushed it down. Waiting for what? The police? They never came down here unless somebody died. Help? Every person on this street knew better than to interfere with Dominic and Adam. Nobody was coming. She's probably in shock, Dominic decided, convincing himself even as the words left his mouth. Pregnant women are emotional. Hormones and shit. She'll snap out of it and then the tears will come. Adam didn't respond. He tilted his head slightly, listening. What? Dominic asked irritably. Footsteps, Adam whispered. Behind us. Dominic almost laughed. It's a public street, genius. People walk. But then he heard it too. Not the scattered, random footfalls of people passing by. Singular footsteps. Deliberate. Getting closer. The crowd's energy changed. Conversations died mid-sentence. People stepped backward, creating space that hadn't existed seconds before. And when Dominic finally turned around, the last thing he saw before his entire world collapsed was a tall man in a long black coat, tattoos visible at his neck and hands, walking toward them with the kind of certainty that doesn't need to be explained, the kind of certainty that ends lives. Benedetta had learned restraint before she'd learned to love. Her father, Giuseppe Marconi, had taught her that power was a quiet thing. He'd run half of Milan's financial district from a corner office with no nameplate on the door, and he'd done it without ever raising his voice. Loud people are desperate people. He'd told her when she was 8 years old. They scream because they're afraid nobody will listen otherwise. She'd carried that lesson across the Atlantic when she'd married Claudio at 23. She'd carried it through the whispers and sideways glances from his associates who thought he'd married a pampered princess, a liability, someone who'd crack the first time things got dangerous. She'd proven them wrong quietly, methodically, the same way her father had taught her. Now, sitting on cold pavement with her hand protecting the life growing inside her, Benedetta felt that same calm settle over her like armor. Pain radiated from her scraped palm. Her hip throbbed where it had hit the concrete. Her dress was wet and probably ruined. None of it mattered. What mattered was the baby 7 months along, a boy, already strong enough that she felt his kicks every few hours. What mattered was memory, detail, precision. What mattered was that when Claudio asked her what happened, she could tell him everything without emotion clouding fact. The taller one, Dominic, had grabbed her left arm first, his grip tight enough to leave marks. 5 distinct pressure points, fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow. The second one, Adam had seized her right arm with his left hand, confirming he was left-handed, a detail that might matter later. They'd pulled her backward with coordinated force, suggesting they'd done this before, that this wasn't spontaneous violence but practiced intimidation. The door had been opened by Dominic's right foot, kicked outward while maintaining his grip on her arm. The threshold had caught her heel, destabilizing her balance. The fall had been inevitable after that, and she'd made the split-second calculation. Protect the baby first, catch herself second. Her wrist might be sprained. She'd need ice, probably a brace. But the baby was fine. She could feel him moving, unbothered by his mother's humiliation, secure in the only world he knew. "Claudio," she whispered, so quietly that only she could hear it. Not a prayer, a promise. She'd called him before entering the bar protocol they'd established years ago. 3 rings, hang up, call back. The signal that meant, "I'm going somewhere you told me not to go, but I'm going anyway, so please don't be too angry." He'd answered on the first ring the second time, his voice already resigned. "Benedetta, Richie's bar on Sullivan Street, just a conversation." A long pause. "You should have sent. I know what I should have done. I'll be 20 minutes. Another pause, longer this time. Then, "I'll be 10 minutes behind you." That had been 35 minutes ago, which meant Claudio had been close, probably parking, probably watching, probably waiting to see if she actually needed him, or if this was another one of her stubborn declarations of independence. Now she needed him, not because she couldn't handle Dominic and Adam herself. She'd been trained by Claudio's security chief, knew exactly where to strike to drop both men before they understood what was happening. Pregnant or not, she was faster and smarter and infinitely more dangerous than 2 street thugs who thought chains and hoodies made them powerful. But she couldn't fight them. Not here, not now. Not 7 months pregnant with witnesses recording everything. The optics alone would be disastrous, a pregnant woman engaging in street violence, questions from police, investigations, attention their family absolutely could not afford. So she'd done what her father taught her. She'd waited, she'd memorized, she'd trusted that the right pieces would move into position at the right time. The crowd's energy shifted before she heard his footsteps. It always did. Claudio carried a presence that preceded him, an atmospheric pressure that made people instinctively create space. She'd seen it at restaurants, at the opera, at their own wedding where guests had unconsciously formed a path for him without being asked. She heard his footsteps now measured, unhurried, each one deliberate, not running, because Claudio Leone never ran toward danger. Danger waited for him. Benedetta watched Dominic's shoulders tense, watched Adam's hand drift toward his waistband where she'd spotted the outline of a knife 20 minutes ago. She watched them process the change in crowd behavior, watched confusion flicker across their faces, watched the moment they understood something was wrong but hadn't yet understood what. She almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Then Claudio's voice cut through the night air, low and controlled and absolutely devoid of emotion. "Gentlemen, I believe you're standing on my wife." Benedetta closed her eyes for just a moment, letting relief wash through her. Not relief that she was saved she'd never needed saving. Relief that she wouldn't have to explain to their son, years from now, why his mother had killed 2 men on a public street while pregnant with him. When she opened her eyes, Dominic and Adam were turning around, their movements slow and uncertain. The crowd had pulled back another 10 feet, phones still recording but held with shaking hands now. And there was Claudio. 6'3", broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid confidence of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. His long black coat swayed slightly with each step, tailored perfectly to his frame. Tattoos marked his neck, intricate work that disappeared beneath his collar. More ink decorated his hands, visible now as he pulled them from his pockets. His face was what stopped people, though. Sharp features, dark eyes that missed nothing, a jawline that looked carved from marble. Handsome in the way that dangerous things are handsome, you appreciate the beauty even as every instinct screams at you to run. He wasn't looking at Dominic or Adam. He was looking at her, those dark eyes scanning for injuries, for blood, for anything that would require immediate response. "I'm fine," Benedetta said clearly, answering his unspoken question. "The baby's fine." Only then did Claudio's gaze shift to the 2 men frozen between them. "Now," he said quietly, "we can discuss what happens next." Claudio Leone had killed his first man at 19 years old, not because he'd wanted to, not because he'd enjoyed it, but because his father's killer had been sitting in a cafe in Naples, drinking espresso and laughing about how easy it had been to put 3 bullets in Giovanni Leone's chest. Claudio had walked into that cafe, sat down across from the man, and waited for him to finish laughing. Then he'd slid a knife between his ribs, paid for both espressos, and walked out before the body hit the floor. That was 23 years ago. He'd learned since then that violence had its place, its purpose, its precise applications. But he'd also learned that the threat of violence, the promise of it, the potential was often more effective than the act itself. Men feared what they couldn't see coming. They feared silence more than shouting. They feared control more than chaos. Right now, standing behind two thugs who'd just dragged his pregnant wife onto the street, Claudio radiated all three. He'd been watching from his car when Benedetta had entered the bar 40 minutes earlier. He'd seen her sit down with Richie, seen the pathetic bar owner's shoulders shake with what was probably crying, seen her calm expression as she'd listened to whatever excuses the man was making. He'd also seen Dominic and Adam position themselves by the door, seen them watching her, seen the moment they'd decided she was prey. He'd stepped out of the car then, but hadn't rushed. Rushing suggested panic, and Claudio never panicked. He'd simply walked at a measured pace, giving Benedetta time to handle things herself if she chose to, giving these two idiots enough rope to hang themselves with. They'd exceeded his expectations. Now, watching them turn around with expressions that cycled rapidly from confusion to recognition to horror, Claudio felt that familiar coldness settle into his chest. Not anger. Anger was hot and messy and made men sloppy. This was something else. This was mathematics. Cause and effect. Action and consequence. "Mr. Leone," Dominic stammered, his hands coming up in a gesture that was half defense, half surrender. We weren't. You weren't what?" Claudio's voice remained conversational, almost curious. He took 3 more steps forward, closing the distance until he was close enough to see the sweat beading on Dominic's forehead despite the cool night air. "You weren't dragging a pregnant woman onto the street? You weren't throwing her onto concrete? You weren't standing over her like she was garbage?" Adam had gone completely still, his face drained of color. His right hand was still near his waistband, and Claudio tracked the movement with the kind of attention that had kept him alive through 2 decades in a business where attention meant everything. "Touch that knife," Claudio said softly, "and you'll be dead before it clears your belt." Adam's hand froze, then slowly moved away, both palms now visible and raised. Smart boy, Claudio thought. Stupid, but teachable. He moved past both men without looking at them, his focus entirely on Benedetta. He could see her scraped palm, the slight disarray of her hair, the way she was sitting with her weight shifted to protect her hip. Injured then. Not seriously, but enough to cause pain. The mathematics in his head adjusted accordingly. Claudio crouched down beside his wife, his coat pooling around him on the wet pavement. Up close, he could see the controlled set of her jaw, the clarity in her eyes. Not shock, not fear. Just that familiar, infuriating calm that had made him fall in love with her 12 years ago. "Your wrist," he said quietly, noting the angle she was holding it. "Sprained, probably. Nothing broken." Her voice was steady, clinical. "Baby's fine. I felt him kick 2 minutes ago." Some of the coldness in Claudio's chest thawed, replaced by relief so intense it almost staggered him. He placed his hand gently over her stomach, feeling the firm swell of life beneath his palm. Their son, their first child, the future they'd planned for, prepared for, protected with every resource at their disposal. And these 2 animals had put all of it at risk. For what? Territory? Pride? The sick pleasure of hurting someone they perceived as weak? The coldness returned, sharper than before. "Can you stand?" he asked Benedetta. "Yes." She took his offered hand with her uninjured one, and he helped her rise slowly, carefully, making sure she was steady before releasing her. Even disheveled, even with a scraped palm and wet dress, she carried herself with a dignity that made everyone watching stand a little straighter. Only then did Claudio turn back to Dominic and Adam. The crowd had grown. More phones, more witnesses, more documentation of this exact moment. Claudio could see faces in windows above the bar, could sense the shift in atmosphere as word spread through the street. Claudio Leone was here. Something was about to happen. "Names," he said simply. "Dominic Kovalenko," the taller one managed. "This is Adam Russo." Claudio committed both names to memory, along with every visible detail. Dominic, approximately 6'2", visible scar above left eyebrow, silver chain with cross pendant, scent of marijuana and cheap cologne. Adam, 5'11", left-handed, silver watch on right wrist, knife in waistband, breathing rapidly from fear rather than exertion now. "You work this street?" Claudio asked, his tone still conversational, still calm. We run security for..." Dominic started, then stopped, apparently realizing that any explanation would only dig the hole deeper. "Security," Claudio repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a noose. You provide security, protection. You keep people safe. Neither man answered. And yet, Claudio continued, taking one step closer. When my wife walked through your territory, your area of responsibility, you decided the appropriate response was to assault her, to drag her onto the street, to throw a pregnant woman onto concrete. We didn't know, Adam tried. You didn't know. Claudio cut him off, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. And that, gentlemen, is exactly the problem. He let silence stretch for 5 long seconds. Around them, the street held its collective breath. Do you know, Claudio finally said, what happens to men who touch my wife? Dominic's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Neither do I, Claudio admitted. Because until tonight, no one has ever been stupid enough to try. He smiled, then a cold, terrible thing that held no humor whatsoever. Congratulations, you're making history. The name Leone carried weight in this city the way gravity carried weight invisible, inevitable, inescapable. Claudio's grandfather had built the foundation in the 1,960 seconds, running numbers and protection rackets through Little Italy with an iron fist wrapped in velvet diplomacy. His father had expanded into legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction, waste management, while maintaining the underground networks that made those businesses untouchable. Claudio had inherited an empire at 26 when his father died, and he'd spent the next 16 years ensuring that empire became a kingdom. He didn't run drugs, didn't traffic people, didn't prey on the desperate or the weak. Those were the rules his grandfather had established, and Claudio honored them not out of morality but out of strategy. Clean money lasted longer than dirty money. Respect lasted longer than fear, though fear certainly had its uses. Like now, Dominic's recognition had come in stages. First, the name Leone had triggered something, a bell ringing somewhere in the back of his consciousness. Then the face, matching grainy photos Dominic had probably seen in newspapers or heard described in whispered conversations. Then the context. Long black coat, visible tattoos, the kind of presence that didn't need introduction. Finally, the full horror of understanding. Oh God, Dominic whispered, his face going from pale to gray. Oh God, oh Jesus, oh. Prayer won't help you now, Claudio said evenly. Though I appreciate the instinct. Adam was processing slower, his eyes darting between Claudio's face and Benedetta's calm expression, trying to reconcile the pregnant woman on the ground with the title of wife and the implications that came with it. Mrs. Leone, Adam breathed, the words coming out like a death sentence. She's your Benedetta Leone, she confirmed, her voice carrying across the silent street with perfect clarity. And you dragged me out of a bar, threw me onto concrete, and stood over me while I was pregnant with my first child. The crowd shifted. Someone gasped. A phone clattered to the ground. Claudio watched the ripple effect spread through the assembled witnesses. The ones who'd been recording, the ones who'd stayed silent, the ones who'd watched entertainment become catastrophe in real time. He could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. Complicity, liability, proximity to something that would be talked about for years. Everyone with a phone, Claudio said, his voice carrying without being raised. Keep recording. I want this documented. That surprised them. Usually, men in his position demanded phones be put away, footage deleted, witnesses silenced. But Claudio understood something they didn't. Documentation wasn't the enemy. Documentation was leverage, evidence, insurance. Let them record. Let them post it online. Let the whole city see what happened to men who touched Benedetta Leone. Sir Mr. Leone, please. We made a mistake. Dominic's words tumbled over each other, desperation making him sloppy. We didn't know. We swear to God we didn't know who she was, and if she'd been anyone else. Claudio interrupted, his tone almost curious. If she'd been a waitress, a teacher, a woman from the neighborhood, would that have made it acceptable? Dominic's mouth worked silently. Answer me, Claudio commanded, and there was steel beneath the velvet now. Would it have been acceptable to drag any pregnant woman onto the street? No, Dominic managed. No, sir, it wouldn't, but you did it anyway. Claudio took another step forward, and both men instinctively stepped back. You saw a woman you perceived as vulnerable, as powerless, as someone who couldn't fight back, and you decided that made her fair game. Adam was shaking now, visible tremors running through his shoulders. We're sorry. You're not sorry, Benedetta said, speaking for the second time. Her voice cut through Adam's pleading like a scalpel. You're frightened. There's a difference. She moved then, walking slowly to stand beside Claudio, her hand still cradling her stomach, her posture straight despite the pain he knew she must be feeling. Together, they formed a united front, power and grace, violence and dignity, consequence incarnate. "Tell them what you said," Benedetta continued, her eyes locked on Dominic's face. "When you grabbed my arm, what were your exact words?" Dominic looked like he might vomit. I can't remember." "Get your pregnant ass off our street," Benedetta recited calmly, each word precisely articulated. "Those were your words. And then you said, 'This corner is ours. You don't belong here.'" She turned to Adam. "And you said, 'Uptown trash thinking she can slum it down here. Let's teach her some manners.'" Adam's knees actually buckled slightly. He caught himself, but the crowd had seen it. The crowd had seen everything. Perfect recall, Claudio noted, something like pride flickering in his voice. "My wife has a gift for remembering details. Faces, voices, exact phrasing. It's one of the many reasons I married her." He let that sink in for a moment, the implication that Benedetta wasn't just his wife but his partner, his equal, someone whose capabilities extended far beyond what these idiots had assumed. "She also remembers," Claudio continued, "that you grabbed her left arm with your right hand, Dominic. 5 points of contact. Enough pressure to bruise. And you, Adam, grabbed her right arm with your left hand. You kicked the door open, destabilizing her balance. And she fell, protecting our son, because neither of you cared enough to consider what you might be destroying." The street was utterly silent now, except for the buzzing neon and the distant sound of traffic. Even the bar had gone quiet. Patrons pressed against windows, watching the scene unfold. "Here's what's going to happen," Claudio said, his voice dropping back to that conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "You're going to answer a question for me. One question. Answer honestly. And you live long enough to regret tonight. Lie to me, and you don't see sunrise." Both men nodded frantically. "Who owns this street?" Claudio asked simply. "You do," Dominic whispered immediately. "You do, Mr. Leone. Everyone knows that. This whole district. Then why?" Claudio interrupted, his voice still quiet, still controlled. "Did you think you had the authority to put your hands on anyone here without my permission?" Neither man had an answer, because there was no answer. There had never been an answer. They'd operated in ignorance and arrogance, and now reality had arrived to collect payment. "Benedetta," Claudio said without looking away from the two thugs, "are you ready to go home?" "Not yet," she replied calmly. "I'd like to hear what they think happens next." Mercy, Claudio's father had once told him, was a luxury afforded only to those who could survive without it. Giovanni Leone had been a hard man, shaped by decades of violence and betrayal, but he'd also been strategic. He'd understood that killing solved immediate problems while creating long-term complications. Bodies drew police attention. Bodies started wars. Bodies made martyrs out of idiots who didn't deserve to be remembered. "The dead can't learn," Giovanni had said, "and they can't spread the message." Claudio had internalized that lesson. He'd built his reputation not on the bodies he'd left behind, though there were some unavoidable casualties of a business built on deterrence, but on the men he'd let live. Men who walked around as living warnings, their destroyed lives testament to what happened when you crossed the Leone family. Dominic and Adam were about to join that particular fraternity. "Please," Dominic was saying, his hands still raised, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please, Mr. Leone, we'll do anything. We'll leave the city. You'll do exactly what I tell you to do." Claudio cut him off. "Nothing more, nothing less." He turned slightly, gesturing to 3 men who'd materialized from the crowd during the confrontation. Not suddenly, they'd been moving into position gradually, professionally, their presence registered by everyone watching, but remarked upon by no one. That was the mark of good security. Visible enough to be respected, subtle enough not to be threatening. Paolo, Claudio's head of security, stepped forward first. 6'4", 240 pounds of controlled violence, with a face that looked carved from granite and eyes that betrayed no emotion whatsoever. He'd been with the Leone family for 18 years, and Claudio trusted him more than he trusted most blood relatives. "Take them," Claudio ordered. "Not here. Somewhere we can talk privately." "No!" Adam's voice cracked with panic. "No, please, not we can talk here, we can." "Privately," Claudio repeated, and the steel in his voice allowed for no negotiation. "Unless you'd prefer I handle this publicly, I can do that. I can show everyone watching exactly what happens to men who assault pregnant women. Would you like that instead? Adam's protests died immediately. He understood the choice being offered. Disappear quietly now, or be made an example of in front of cameras that would immortalize his suffering across every social media platform by morning. Paolo and his 2 associates moved with practiced efficiency. No weapons drawn, no unnecessary force, just firm hands on shoulders, guiding Dominic and Adam toward a black SUV parked half a block away. Both thugs went quietly, their resistance broken by the fundamental understanding that fighting would only make things worse. The crowd parted like water, creating a clear path. Phones continued recording, but the atmosphere had shifted from shock to something closer to satisfaction. Street justice, witnessed and approved. The kind of rough morality that existed in neighborhoods where official authority was viewed with suspicion and local power structures maintained order through demonstration rather than legislation. "Wait," Benedetta said suddenly, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. Everyone froze. Paolo's hand tightened slightly on Dominic's shoulder, holding him in place. Claudio turned to his wife. One eyebrow raised slightly in question. Benedetta walked slowly toward the 2 men, her movements careful, dignified despite the pain he knew she must be feeling. She stopped directly in front of Dominic, close enough that he had to look down to meet her eyes. "I want you to understand something," she said quietly, her Italian accent more pronounced now, the way it always became when emotions ran high. "I'm not angry that you didn't recognize me. I'm not angry that you didn't know my husband's name. I'm angry because you saw a pregnant woman and thought that made me weak. You thought my condition made me acceptable prey." Dominic's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me," Benedetta interrupted. "Save your apologies for every woman you've ever treated like this. Every person you've decided was beneath you, was vulnerable, was fair game because they couldn't fight back." She turned to Adam, who'd been watching with growing horror. "You have a mother?" Adam nodded mutely. "Would you want someone to treat her the way you treated me tonight?" "No," Adam whispered. "God, no." "Then why did you think I deserved it?" Benedetta's voice remained calm, almost gentle, but the question landed like a physical blow. "Because I'm not your mother? Because I'm a stranger? Because you thought no one would care?" Adam had no answer. There was no answer that wouldn't condemn him further. Benedetta stepped back, her hand returning to her stomach in a gesture that had become instinctive over the past 7 months. "My son will grow up knowing what happened tonight. He'll know that 2 men hurt his mother before he was even born, and he'll also know that his father handled it with precision and restraint. That's the difference between men like my husband and men like you, Control." She looked at Claudio then, something passing between them that didn't require words. Permission, perhaps, or acknowledgement. Either way, Claudio nodded slightly. "Take them," Benedetta said to Paolo. But Claudio, no blood on the street. Not in front of all these cameras, not in front of our neighbors. It was a command disguised as a request. The kind of careful balance she'd mastered over years of navigating the complicated world Claudio inhabited. She wasn't asking him to spare them, she was asking him to be smart about their destruction. "No blood," Claudio agreed. "But everything else is negotiable." Paolo and his men resumed their escort, loading both thugs into the SUV with professional efficiency. The vehicle's doors closed with expensive-sounding thuds, muffling the sounds of Dominic's renewed pleading. Claudio watched the SUV pull away, his expression neutral. Then he turned his attention to the bar itself, where Richie's face was visible in the window, pale and sweating and clearly contemplating his own mortality. "The bar owner," Claudio said to one of Paolo's remaining associates, a younger man named Enzo. "Bring him outside, gently." Enzo disappeared through the bar's entrance. Less than 30 seconds later, he emerged with Richie in tow, the bar owner stumbling slightly, his shirt stained with sweat, his eyes darting between Claudio and the assembled crowd like a trapped animal looking for escape routes. "Mr. Leone," Richie stammered immediately. "I didn't. I had no idea they were going to." "You had 2 men working your door," Claudio interrupted. "Men who assaulted my wife in front of your establishment. Men who clearly believed they had authority on this street." "They don't work for me," Richie protested. "I swear. They just hang around. They claim they're providing security, but You never paid them," Richie hesitated. And that hesitation was answer enough. The bar changed hands 72 hours later. Not through violence or coercion, but through a simple conversation in which Richie understood that continuing to own a business on Sullivan Street would require resources he no longer possessed, protection he could no longer afford, peace of mind he would never regain. Claudio offered him $60,000 for the property, twice what it was worth in its current condition, enough to relocate somewhere far away where pregnant women didn't get assaulted outside his establishment and their husbands didn't have conversations about consequence. Richie took the money and disappeared to Florida within a week. The bar reopened under new management a month later. Clean floors, updated bathrooms, a staff that understood exactly whose territory they operated in. The neon signs were replaced with subtler lighting. The clientele shifted from desperate to respectable, but the real changes happened in the spaces between, in the whispered conversations, the careful avoidances, the sudden shift in how people moved through that particular stretch of Sullivan Street. Dominic Kovalenko's name surfaced first in the gambling halls on the east side, where word spread that he owed money to people who didn't forgive debts. $15,000 to a loan shark named Petrov, who'd been patient for months but had suddenly decided patience was expensive. $8,000 to a poker game run by Chinatown enforcers who'd previously considered Dominic a reliable mark but now viewed him as a liability. Nobody collected those debts violently. They didn't need to. The whispers were enough. Dominic had touched Benedetta Leone, and Claudio Leone had decided his financial protections were no longer in effect. Within 2 weeks, Dominic lost his apartment. His car was repossessed. The corner store where he'd worked part-time for years suddenly discovered inventory discrepancies and fired him without severance. His girlfriend, a woman named Tasha, who'd tolerated his criminal lifestyle because it paid for her nursing school, left after Claudio's people had a quiet conversation with her about opportunity costs and long-term planning. Dominic wasn't beaten, wasn't hospitalized, wasn't killed. He simply stopped existing in any way that mattered. Adam Russo's destruction followed a different trajectory, one that Benedetta had specifically requested. Where Dominic lost money and status, Adam lost trust, something infinitely more valuable in their world. It started with his crew. 3 men he'd run with for 5 years. Men he'd considered brothers, suddenly wanted distance. They'd heard what happened outside the bar, seen the footage that circulated through encrypted channels before being scrubbed from public platforms. They'd heard Claudio Leone's name associated with their operation, and they understood that proximity to Adam now meant proximity to consequences they couldn't afford. Then came the police attention. Nothing overt, no arrests, no charges, just increased presence. Patrol cars driving past Adam's usual corners twice as often. Officers stopping to chat with people he associated with, asking casual questions about activities and associations. Detective work disguised as community policing, making it clear that someone with authority had decided Adam's business deserved scrutiny. Claudio hadn't made those calls directly. He didn't need to. He'd simply mentioned to a district attorney he'd known for 15 years, a man whose campaign had benefited from Leone family donations, that certain individuals on Sullivan Street had become problematic, and perhaps existing investigative resources could be redirected. The DA, understanding perfectly what was being requested and why, had made a single phone call. The rest happened organically, systemically, with the inexorable efficiency of bureaucracy aimed at a specific target. Within 3 weeks, Adam's knife, the one he'd been reaching for that night, became evidence in an unrelated assault case. His fingerprints, conveniently on file from a previous arrest, matched prints found at a burglary scene he'd had nothing to do with, but couldn't prove he wasn't involved in. No charges were filed. That would have required evidence, trials, opportunities for appeal. Instead, Adam simply found himself trapped in a web of suspicion and investigation that made normal criminal activity impossible and legitimate employment unattainable. He tried leaving the city, made it as far as Philadelphia before Claudio's network there politely suggested he return home, made it to Boston before the same thing happened, tried Atlantic City, and found doors closed before he could even ask for entry. The message was clear. Claudio Leone's reach extended beyond Sullivan Street, beyond the city limits, into territories and jurisdictions that most street-level criminals couldn't even imagine accessing. By the end of the first month, Adam was sleeping in his cousin's basement, doing day labor for cash, avoiding every corner and bar where he'd once felt powerful. He'd lost his girlfriend, his apartment, his reputation, and most critically, his belief that he controlled anything about his own life. The footage from that night, the footage Claudio had encouraged people to record, never went fully public. Clips circulated in certain circles, edited versions appeared briefly on social media before being removed, and rumors spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. But the full video, the complete documentation of what had happened, remained under Leone family control. That was strategic. The full footage was worth more as leverage than as entertainment. Anyone who'd been there, anyone who'd watched, anyone who'd failed to intervene, now understood that evidence existed. Evidence that could be released or buried, depending on future behavior, future cooperation, future alignment with Leone family interests. The bouncer, who'd been working the door that night, a man named Jimmy Reese, who'd seen Dominic and Adam grab Benedetta but had turned away instead of intervening, received a visit from Paolo 3 days after the incident. Not a violent visit, just a conversation about responsibility, awareness, and the importance of knowing when to act versus when to call for help. Jimmy kept his job at his new employer, a Leone-owned restaurant 6 blocks away, but he never worked security again. His new position was dishwasher, with hours that meant he'd never be responsible for anyone's safety except the cleanliness of plates. The crowd of witnesses who'd recorded everything received no direct contact, but they noticed changes. The street felt safer. Police presence increased slightly, not oppressively, but noticeably. Streetlights that had been broken for months were suddenly repaired. Graffiti was cleaned promptly. The neighborhood improvement wasn't coincidental. Claudio understood that witnesses could be assets or liabilities depending on how they were treated. The people who'd watched his wife get assaulted and had documented it rather than helped her needed to understand that their neighborhood's stability depended on awareness, on knowing when to call for help, on understanding that silence enabled violence. But they also needed to see that reporting, documenting, bearing witness, had consequences, positive ones. In this case, their street became safer because they'd recorded evidence. Their neighborhood improved because someone with resources had decided improvement served his interests. It was a lesson in power dynamics that didn't require explanation. People understood instinctively. The Leone family protected those who documented truth, punished those who facilitated harm, and rewarded cooperation with stability. Within 6 weeks, Sullivan Street had transformed from a place where pregnant women got assaulted to a place where that would never happen again. Not because of police, not because of laws, because everyone who lived there now understood exactly who was watching. The warehouse on the industrial edge of the city had no windows, no identifying marks, nothing that would distinguish it from the dozens of other anonymous buildings that lined the waterfront. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across concrete floors that had been thoroughly cleaned but still carried the faint chemical smell of industrial disinfectant. Dominic and Adam sat in metal chairs in the center of the empty space, their hands zip-tied behind their backs, their faces illuminated by the overhead lights in a way that made them look younger than they were, vulnerable, small. Claudio stood 15 feet away, his coat removed now, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the full extent of the tattoos that marked his forearms. Paolo stood to his right, silent and imposing. 2 other men, Enzo and an older associate named Gianni, flanked the exits. They'd been here for 6 hours now, not tortured, not beaten, just sitting in silence while Claudio made phone calls, had conversations, conducted business as though they weren't even present. That was worse than violence would have been. "You understand," Claudio said finally, setting his phone down on a nearby table, "that I've spent the last 6 hours dismantling your lives." Dominic's head jerked up, eyes wide. Adam made a sound that might have been a whimper. "Dominic," Claudio continued, his tone conversational, almost friendly. "You owe Petrov $15,000. Did you know he's been patient with you because he thought you were connected? That he believed you had protection from someone who mattered?" Dominic's face went white. "I called him 2 hours ago," Claudio said. "I explained that you have no protection, that you are in fact specifically unprotected, that anyone who wishes to collect from you has my blessing to do so." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward Dominic. "He's already sent 3 men to your apartment. They're waiting for you, patiently." Dominic's breathing accelerated, panic overtaking rationality. "Please, Mr. Leone, please. I can pay him. I just need time." "You have no time," Claudio interrupted. "You also owe $8,000 to the Chinatown poker game. They've been informed of the same arrangement. And your landlord? I bought your building this afternoon. Your lease terminates in 72 hours. Adam was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "Adam," Claudio turned his attention to the second man, "you're going to have a different experience. I've shared your name and photograph with every criminal organization in a 200-mile radius. Not as a threat, as information. They now know you put your hands on my wife." He let that sink in for a moment. "Do you understand what that means? It means that everywhere you go, people will know your face. They'll know what you did, and they'll know that the Leone family remembers. You won't be killed, that would be mercy. But you'll never be trusted again. Never be accepted. Never be anything more than the idiot who assaulted Benedetta Leone. Adam's sobbing intensified, his whole body convulsing with the weight of understanding. I'm also having conversations with the police, Claudio continued. Nothing dramatic, just ensuring they understand that certain individuals on Sullivan Street have been operating without proper oversight. Your name has been mentioned in connection with several unsolved cases. Assault, robbery, extortion. I didn't... Adam started, but Claudio held up one hand. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. It matters what can be suggested, what can be investigated, what can make your life complicated enough that legitimate work becomes impossible and criminal work becomes too risky. Paolo shifted slightly, drawing both men's attention. He hadn't said a word since they'd arrived, but his presence alone conveyed volumes about what could happen, what might happen, what was being actively chosen not to happen. Here's what's going to occur, Claudio said, his voice dropping lower, forcing both men to strain to hear him. You're going to leave this warehouse alive, unharmed, no broken bones, no scars, nothing that would suggest physical punishment. Hope flickered briefly in Dominic's eyes. But, Claudio continued, and that single word extinguished the hope immediately. You're going to discover that being alive isn't the same as living. You'll find that money you thought you had access to is gone. Protection you thought you'd earned has evaporated. Friends you believed were loyal have disappeared. Opportunities you assumed would always exist have closed permanently. He walked closer now, until he stood directly in front of both chairs, close enough that they had to tilt their heads back to maintain eye contact. This is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness, Claudio said softly. My wife didn't scream because she didn't need to. She didn't fight because she knew I was coming. She didn't beg because she's never had to beg for anything in her life. You saw a pregnant woman and thought that made her pray. You were wrong. Dominic was trembling now, his entire body shaking despite the warehouse's warmth. You're going to carry this with you forever, Claudio continued. Every time you can't make rent, every time a door closes in your face, every time someone recognizes your name and decides you're not worth the risk, you'll remember the night you dragged Benedetta Leone onto the street. You'll remember that 30 seconds of cruelty cost you everything that mattered. He stepped back, nodding to Paolo. Cut them loose, Claudio ordered. Give them enough money for bus fare across the city. Not out of the city they don't get to leave yet. Just far enough that they have to walk through neighborhoods where my name is known, where people will recognize their faces, where they'll understand exactly how completely they've been marked. Paolo moved forward with a knife, cutting through the zip ties with practiced efficiency. Both men's hands came free, but neither moved immediately, their wrists marked with red lines from hours of restraint. Stand up, Claudio commanded. They stood, unsteady, disoriented. Dominic Kovalenko, Adam Russo. Claudio's voice carried formal weight now, like a judge pronouncing sentence. You are banned from Sullivan Street. You are banned from any establishment I own or have interest in. You are banned from conducting any business in territories under Leone family protection. Violation of these terms will result in consequences that make tonight look like mercy. He paused, letting each word settle. Do you understand? Both men nodded frantically. Say it, Claudio demanded. I understand, Dominic whispered. I understand, Adam echoed. Good. Claudio turned away, dismissing them with his posture. Paolo, see them out. Make sure they understand the route home. As Paolo escorted both men toward the exit, Dominic looked back once, his face a mask of desperation and disbelief. Why? He asked, the word barely audible. Why not just kill us? Claudio turned back, and for the first time that night, he smiled a cold, calculated expression that held no warmth whatsoever. Because the dead can't spread the message, he said simply. But you two? You'll tell everyone. You'll be walking proof of what happens when you touch what's mine. Death ends the story. Ruin continues it. The warehouse door clanged shut behind them, the sound echoing through the empty space like a cell door closing. Claudio stood alone in the fluorescent light, his phone already out, already moving to the next call, the next conversation, the next piece of business that required attention. Punishment delivered, message sent, consequences established. Now came the part that mattered more. Ensuring Benedetta felt safe again. The hospital room was private, expensive, and exactly the kind of sterile environment Claudio had always despised. Too bright, too clean, too full of machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference to the profound human moment occurring within its walls. But Benedetta had insisted on a hospital birth despite his offers to arrange private medical staff at their home. "Our son deserves the best equipment, the best doctors, the best chance," she'd said, her hand on her swollen belly, her eyes carrying that particular determination he'd learned never to argue against. So here they were, 2 months after the incident on Sullivan Street, in a private suite on the hospital's top floor with Paolo stationed outside the door, and 2 additional men positioned at the elevator and stairwell. Benedetta's contractions had started at 4 in the morning. It was now nearly 8 in the evening, and Claudio had watched his wife endure 16 hours of increasing pain with the same quiet dignity she'd shown sitting on that rain-slicked pavement. She didn't scream, didn't curse him for getting her pregnant, didn't demand drugs beyond what the doctors recommended, didn't lose the composure that defined her even when he could see agony flashing behind her eyes. "You're allowed to yell," he'd told her during one particularly intense contraction, his hand gripping hers as she squeezed hard enough to hurt. "Why?" she'd asked through gritted teeth. "Would it make the pain less? No. Then why waste the energy?" That was Benedetta, practical even in the midst of labor, strategic even when her body was being torn apart to bring new life into the world. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Patel who delivered half the wealthy families in the city, checked Benedetta's progress and nodded with satisfaction. "Almost there, Mrs. Leone. 1 more hour, maybe less. You're doing beautifully." Claudio had been in situations where men had guns pointed at his head, where negotiations had gone bad, where violence was one wrong word away from erupting. He'd handled all of it with calculated calm, with strategic thinking, with the kind of control that had kept him alive through 2 decades in a dangerous business. But watching Benedetta labor to bring their son into the world, knowing there was nothing he could do except hold her hand and bear witness, that terrified him in ways combat never had. "Claudio," Benedetta said softly during a brief respite between contractions. "Talk to me. Distract me. About what?" "The street. Sullivan Street. Tell me what happened to them." He'd kept most of the details from her, not out of protection but out of respect. She'd asked him to handle it, and he'd handled it. She didn't need the specifics unless she wanted them. Now, apparently, she wanted them. "Dominic lost everything," Claudio said quietly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Apartment, money, connections. Last I heard, he's working day labor in Queens, sleeping in a boarding house, avoiding anywhere he used to consider his territory." "Good," Benedetta said simply. "Adam got worse treatment. I made sure his name circulated. He can't work anywhere in the criminal world, can't be trusted, can't rebuild, he's a ghost." Another contraction hit, and Benedetta's grip tightened, her breathing controlled, measured, working through the pain with the same discipline she applied to everything else in her life. When it passed, she opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "Do you regret it? Being merciful?" "I wasn't merciful," Claudio corrected. "I was strategic. They're alive, but they're lessons. Everyone who hears their story understands what happens when you touch any pregnant woman." Benedetta corrected firmly. "Any woman. That's what I told you that night. I wasn't angry they didn't know who I was. I was angry they thought any woman was acceptable prey." "I know. Do you?" Her eyes held his, searching for something. "Because I need you to understand, Claudio. Our son," she gasped as another contraction started, worked through it, continued. "Our son needs to grow up knowing that power isn't about who you can hurt. It's about who you protect." The words hit him harder than any physical blow could have. This was the conversation they'd been building toward since that night. The fundamental question about what kind of father he'd be, what kind of man he'd teach their son to become. "I protect what's mine," Claudio said carefully. "Expand that definition," Benedetta replied, her voice strained but clear. "Protect what's yours, yes, but also protect what's right. There's a difference between being feared and being respected. I want our son to understand that difference." Dr. Patel returned, checked Benedetta's progress, and smiled. "Time to push, Mrs. Leone. Your baby is ready to meet you." Everything accelerated after that. Instructions from the doctor, encouragement from nurses, Benedetta's controlled breathing shifting to determined effort, Claudio's world narrowing to just this room, just this moment, just his wife bringing their child into existence through sheer force of will. And then, at 8:47 p.m., on a Thursday evening in late September, their son entered the world screaming his fury at the bright lights and cold air and the fundamental injustice of being forced from warm safety into harsh reality. "He's perfect," Dr. Patel announced, placing the baby on Benedetta's chest. "Healthy, strong lungs, beautiful boy." Claudio stared at the tiny human red-faced, covered in vernix, impossibly small and impossibly fragile, and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Not softness, exactly, but expansion, room for something he hadn't known he could feel. "Luca," Benedetta whispered, her hand cradling their son's head. Luca Giovanni Leone, named for Claudio's grandfather and father, carrying the weight of family legacy in 8 syllables. Claudio reached out with one finger, touching his son's tiny hand. Immediately, instinctively, Luca's fingers wrapped around his father's, gripping with surprising strength. "He knows you," Benedetta said softly, tears streaming down her face for the first time that night. Not from pain, from joy. Claudio looked at his wife exhausted, glowing, triumphant, and then at his son, and understood with perfect clarity what Benedetta had been trying to tell him. Power wasn't proven by destroying Dominic and Adam. Power was proven by this. By protecting Benedetta through 16 hours of labor. By bringing their son safely into the world. By building something that could withstand the violence and chaos that defined their world. "I understand," he said quietly, meeting Benedetta's eyes. She smiled genuinely, fully, without reservation. "I know you do." Outside, beyond the private room, Paolo stood guard. Throughout the city, people whispered about Sullivan Street, about consequences, about the price of crossing the Leone family. But inside this room, none of that mattered. Inside this room, there was only a family. Beginning. Benedetta walked slowly down Sullivan Street on a crisp October afternoon, her steps careful and measured, her hand resting on the stroller where Luca slept peacefully beneath a navy blanket embroidered with his initials. She hadn't been back since that night. Recovery from childbirth had taken weeks, then caring for a newborn had consumed every moment, and honestly, she hadn't felt the need to return. The street held no particular importance beyond what had happened there, but today she'd woken up with the urge to see it again. To walk the same pavement where she'd been dragged and humiliated, to reclaim the space in a way that felt necessary for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. Claudio had offered to come with her. She'd declined. This was something she needed to do alone well, alone with Luca, which was its own kind of accompanied solitude. The street had changed. She noticed it immediately. The bar where Richie had once operated was now called Marconi's, her father's name, which made her smile despite herself. Claudio's gesture, undoubtedly. The neon signs had been replaced with elegant brass fixtures. The windows were clean, the sidewalk swept, the entire facade suggesting respectability rather than desperation. 2 doors down, where the Shamrock sign had glowed green, a new restaurant was opening. Construction workers moved in and out, carrying materials, their voices cheerful with the optimism of employment and purpose. Benedetta stopped at the exact spot where she'd fallen. The pavement looked the same rain-stained concrete, slightly cracked, unremarkable in every way except for the memory it held. She stood there for a long moment, looking down at the ground, remembering the scrape of her palm, the shock of impact, the cold wetness seeping through her dress, remembering Dominic's voice, Adam's grip, the crowd's silence. Then she looked up and saw the people around her. A woman walking past with groceries smiled at the stroller, then at Benedetta. "Beautiful baby, thank you," Benedetta replied. An older man sitting on a nearby bench nodded respectfully as she passed. "Mrs. Leone." She acknowledged him with a slight nod, noting his careful posture, the way he'd known her name despite never having met her. Word traveled. Faces became known. The city remembered. 3 young men stood outside the restaurant construction site, smoking cigarettes on their break. When they saw her approaching, they immediately stubbed out their cigarettes and stepped aside, creating space on the sidewalk. "Ma'am," one of them said, his accent carrying hints of Eastern Europe, his eyes respectful but not meeting hers directly. She pushed the stroller past them, noting their deference, understanding without being told that these were men who worked for Leone-affiliated contractors, who understood exactly who she was and what respect required. The street remembered, yes, but it remembered the right lessons. Paolo emerged from a cafe halfway down the block, espresso in hand, his presence simultaneously casual and purposeful. He'd been following her from a distance, she realized. Claudio hadn't let her come alone after all, had simply arranged protection subtle enough not to insult her independence. She felt irritation flicker, then fade. It was reasonable. She was still the woman who'd been assaulted on this street, and Claudio was still the man who'd promised consequences for anyone who threatened what was his. "Mrs. Leone," Paolo greeted her, falling into step beside the stroller. "Beautiful day for a walk." "It is," she agreed, not calling him out on the surveillance, not making it awkward. They walked in companionable silence for half a block before Paolo spoke again. The street is better now. It wasn't a question, but Benedetta answered anyway. Yes, cleaner, safer. Mr. Leone wanted you to know. No one who works these blocks now is like them. Everyone who operates here understands the rules. Respect, dignity, protection of those who can't protect themselves. Benedetta glanced at him, noting the careful phrasing, the way he was delivering a message from Claudio without making it obvious. He's changed the culture, not just punished two men. Exactly. Paolo smiled slightly. He said you'd understand that distinction. They reached the end of Sullivan Street, where it intersected with a wider avenue full of traffic and noise and the anonymous bustle of city life. Benedetta paused there, looking back at the block they'd just traversed. From this distance, it looked peaceful, ordinary, a street like any other, full of businesses and pedestrians, and the everyday rhythms of urban existence. But she knew better. She knew what had happened there, what had been set in motion there, what had been fundamentally transformed because two stupid men had made one catastrophic decision. Luca stirred in his stroller, making the small grunting sounds that preceded waking. Benedetta reached down, adjusting his blanket, her movements automatic and tender. Your father is a complicated man, she whispered to her sleeping son. But he's a good man. He'll teach you to be strong, and I'll teach you to be kind. Between us, you'll understand that real power isn't about fear, it's about making sure streets like this one stay safe for people who can't defend themselves. Luca's eyes opened dark like his father's, already focused and alert despite being only weeks old. He looked up at his mother, with an expression that seemed impossibly wise for someone so new to the world. You'll understand someday, Benedetta continued softly. You'll understand that the night before you were born, your father didn't just punish two men. He changed how an entire neighborhood thinks about power, about protection, about who deserves dignity and safety. Paolo had stepped away discreetly, giving her privacy for this moment with her son. Around them, the city continued its endless motion, cars passing, people walking, lives intersecting and diverging in the chaotic dance of urban existence. But on Sullivan Street, behind them, something had shifted permanently. The street remembered, and what it remembered wasn't just violence and consequence. It remembered that Benedetta Leone had been dragged onto pavement, had protected her unborn child, had maintained her dignity, and had emerged victorious not through her own violence but through the systematic, strategic, and absolutely thorough response of a man who understood that power meant nothing if it couldn't protect the people who mattered most. Benedetta turned away from Sullivan Street and headed home, Paolo trailing at a respectful distance, Luca sleeping peacefully in his stroller, the afternoon sun warm on her face. Behind her, the street whispered its lessons to anyone willing to listen, and the city learned. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.
Мораль. Когда ты заходишь в интернет и видишь, как люди там в Дубае летают, покупают себе огромное количество автомобилей какие-то. Ну, много всего такого, что ты за эту зарплату себе никогда в жизни позволить не сможешь. И как человеку оставаться морально типа сильным? Что ему нужно делать? Ну, наверное, во-первых, это, наверное, все от семьи исходит, да? То есть, какая семья у тебя, как она построена. Если ты один живешь, это сложно, да, ты будешь сам себя, но у тебя, опять-таки, возможно, ну, родители, если есть, которые, друзья, поддержат тебя в какой-то момент, хотя бы просто отвлекут тебя от этих мыслей. А если у тебя, к примеру, там, семья, жена, к примеру, да, есть дети, то тут, наверное, поддержка только от них исходит какая-то. Вот, чтобы не упиваться в своих мыслях о том, что какая нынче сложная жизнь. И, наверное, других-то вариантов, в принципе-то, и нету. Какие вот еще варианты, в принципе, изменить, поменять свою жизнь настолько, чтобы она была, ну, казалась тебе удачной, да, реализованным себя в жизни, в чем-то. вот как проявляется на самом деле у нас реализованность? Наверное, у 90% случаев это финансовое благополучие, финансовая независимость. Это, наверное, одно из таких ключевых моментов, когда человек, наверное, считает себя реализованным, да, в этой жизни. То есть, как добиться этого? То есть, с учетом того, что даже возьмем нашу страну, да, сколько миллионов людей здесь живет, как каждому добиться этого результата? Непонятно. И с каждым годом просто ситуация становится все хуже и хуже. Все дорожает, люди зарабатывают либо столько же. Ну, даже если они зарабатывают столько же, на самом деле этого все уже недостаточно. К чему это все приведет на самом деле? В оконцове, наверное, мир погрязнет в большую депрессию в какую-то. Какие-то войны, возможно, или еще что-то еще больше глобальных таких вещей, которые не приведут ни к чему хорошему на самом деле. Поддержка каждого человека именно для того, чтобы он держался, наверное, морально, заключается в том, что, ну, наверное, дом, в который ты приходишь, должен быть крепостью твоей. Да? Что это единственное должно быть место, где ты будешь чувствовать себя под защитой. Для этого было придумано, наверное, своя пещера изначально, потом свои какие-то чумы, палатки различные, да, потом все это превратилось. На данный момент это у нас дома, квартиры, в которые мы приходим и должны ощущать себя в безопасности. Чтобы можно быть немного морально расслабленным с учетом того, что ты выходишь каждый день на работу, на улицу, и все равно давление вот это вот, оно все равно присутствует. Когда ты заходишь в магазин, видишь цены эти, да, и так далее, не можешь себе что-то там приобрести, позволить на ежедневной основе, это откладывает большой, наверное, отпечаток. Не, наверное, а точно. И поэтому, когда возвращаясь домой, ты чувствуешь, вот хотя бы есть типа уголок того места, куда ты можешь прийти. Уголок на самом деле человеку много тоже не надо. Можно хотеть большего, но на самом деле человеку одному много не надо. Да? Ему нужно спальное место, спокойное место, где можно подумать. Ну, это когда ты один, к примеру, да? Когда у тебя есть семья, к примеру, ты приходишь домой, опять-таки, тут хотя бы, да, поговорить о каких-то вещах. Просто об отрешенных вещах, наверное. И, возможно, при этих же условиях у тебя и появляется какая-то дополнительная мотивация для реализации себя. А когда у тебя нету ничего, вот это уже становится проблемой. И это у многих на самом деле. Что значит не иметь ничего? Тут, наверное, самое главное, дизмораль у человека еще возникает при том, что это уже, наверное, где-то в глубине души даже она возникает при даже хорошей финансовой подушке такой, которая у тебя есть, хороших финансовых деньгах, да, то есть, но нету вот внутреннего ощущения, к примеру, дружбы, семьи, любви и так далее. Это уже отдельно на самом деле разговор, потому что мы, вот, к примеру, можем взять, как сейчас вот Мелстрой, если кто-то смотрит, насколько тяжело обладать такими финансами и не иметь, по сути, ничего. ни друзей, ничего не иметь. Так главное это получается для бедных главное деньги, для богатых главное какое-то внутреннее ощущение нужности, не из-за денег. Вот такой вот. И эта борьба какая-то такая и вот эти два слоя общества, богатые и бедные, они друг друга не понимают. На самом деле из-за этого, возможно. Потому что богатый человек, он уже не смотрит на деньги, он не считает эти деньги. Ему важно внутреннее вот это вот ощущение того, что он нужен без них даже. Это как Тони Старку сказали: а кто ты без костюма? На вот это я филантроп, тудым-сюдым, он сказал, да? Так и человеку, у которого много денег, ты задашь вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Ну, что ты представляешь себе без денег? Вот и это, наверное, возможно, таких людей богатых, как вот, например, там Мелстрой, задав ему этот вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Он на него ответить-то и не сможет. Обратная сторона людей бедных, да, вот если мы посмотрим, человеку